So let's go ahead here. We have a subcommittee today tasked with the responsibility for looking at SB 378. And 378 is relative to the PBAS program, which we have, performance-based school accountability system, which the DOE uses in terms of looking at performance accountability. And this bill was submitted by the department and came to us from, of course, from the Senate. And when it was presented to us, I think there were a number of issues raised. We were looking at statutory references too and saw some of the way it once was and under the annotated versions here. So what I'd like to do for right now, there is a revised amendment which is designed, it was supposed to be just plain draft and not an amendment with my name on it. It would be just a draft for as some of the thoughts which might go into are looking at this. So what I'd like to do at this time is open this up to a discussion and invite both Caitlin and Nate up if you're both involved with this. You know, since you're working from way back there, might as well come join the club. Okay, since we last discussed this, I've had communication with the department and in the department with me as well. And I'd like to just go right down through 378 as introduced and 378 as you're looking on the amendment, and we can go down by Roman 1, 2, and go down through this thing and see where some of these changes are and whether they reflect what this committee is desirous of moving towards. So does everybody have the original as introduced and the amendment? So we can just put them right beside each other and try to walk through a little bit. We also had on this one a side-by-side done by Jennifer Ford. Does everybody have that side-by-side as well? That takes the bill as introduced and compares it to current law. So we have several pieces of paper we can use during our adventure here to try to figure out where we're going with this thing. So I'm looking at the bill as introduced right now, where it says Roman 1, under 1, there is hereby established a task force to develop and review the performance-based school accountability, PBAS, that will serve to demonstrate a school is providing, et cetera, et cetera. Anybody have a problem with that? Because that's current law, right? No, it's not. But is there a problem with number 1 here? Okay, let's jump down to Roman 2. The commissioner, in consultation with the Legislative Oversight Committee established in RSA 193C:8 and governor, shall appoint no fewer than 9 and no more than 15 members to the task force, which shall consist of. This is where this other amendment departs significantly from the language which was in the bill as it was introduced to us. And the law on page 570 in your statute books, in historical and statutory notes, says at least every 4 years the commissioner shall review the performance-based accountability system and make recommendations to the Legislative Oversight Committee. The commissioner may establish a task force to assist with this review. The commissioner or designee shall be the chairman of the task force and shall appoint no fewer than, and it goes on, it's the numbers as we have in front of us here. So that's where that older language was. So it's open to discussion now. Caitlin or Nate, you're welcome to just jump in at any time because we want to try to get through this today, if we can. From the committee, yes, Representative Cornell.
Committee, but
Well, okay, let's start. Who's on this committee? Okay, let's first start with Representative Cascadden then, who's on the committee, and then we'll go to other members and then invite others in. Yes.
Thank you. I have a couple, just a couple points. I did the same thing, go over my notes to see what would be amended. And I see that some of, in the amendment you gave us this morning has some of the parts that I had put down in my draft. Going back to the statute, has there been a task force established previous to now?
That's a good question for the
Okay.
department.
There was previously a task force that was established, but it hasn't been in law since at least 2020, and it hasn't been implemented probably since at least 2015. So the problem or the challenges is there was the original task force that did the PBAS work, and then the department kind of took that to use as the task force when the ESSA Act, the Every Student Succeeds Act, was passed, and we needed an accountability task force to oversee our federal legislation. And we kind of used one and the same, and we still have that task force that's in place, but they focus specifically on the federal legislation. We
On
really
ESSA.
do need a separate one for the state side of accountability, because there's too much for one task force to do.
Okay.
We would need full-time people to do it if we were to do both. So.
Okay, that puts that in perspective.
Anybody else from the subcommittee? Representative Dry?
Thank you. I was just going back to my mental definition of a task force, which is do a task, then disband. And looking at this, it says the task force is to develop and review. So does that mean it's in perpetuity, this task force?
So, yeah, so we would see it as a task force that would review the accountability results each year to make sure that when the department is doing the determinations that they feel like it is appropriate. The determinations that we eventually put in law will be an appropriate reflection of the measurement of of accountability for an adequate education. We really do value because right now with our federal accountability task force, it's made up of practitioners. We really do value their input, and so we typically meet 3 or 4 times a year. At least once before we start the work, once after we can start the work, sometimes during the work, to make sure that the work that we're doing is, 1, aligned to the federal law, and then 2, if the work that we're doing needs to, or like our plan needs to be modified as a result of the results of the work that's done.
Okay, follow up.
Yes.
So I guess, is that a task force thing or more like a commission at that point?
We call it an accountability task force. If we want to update terms, the department would be happy to do that, but right now we call it the
And it
accountability
would go
task
on in
force.
perpetuity?
Our current one does, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Cascadden again.
Do you want to keep going down, or, I mean,
Well,
do you want me to wait till you say, okay, what about A, what about B, what about C?
okay, I think that what we ought to do is just, we get the drift of where that sentence is right there. Let's look at lines 12 on the amendment, 12 down right through to G.
Okay, yep.
And we do the same thing on the bill as introduced, and we can also look in the annotated version as well.
Mr. Chair, before we leave too, can I just ask why you took out consultation with the Legislative Oversight Committee? Line 8 on the original. It says a commissioner in consultation with the legislative oath established
Is
in
it something-
governors.
Because later on, the task force or the department has to report to, let's see if I can find it here,
Yep, the end.
at the end of the bill.
Yeah.
Task force should develop performance-based scoring system. Yes. The task force shall provide a report of findings and recommendations for future legislation for performance accountability system to the State Board of Education and the Legislative Oversight Committee established pursuant to RSA 193. I just mark that down as a note, as a reminder that, we may want to that might be a point of discussion that might concern the I've always been a little bit concerned that the task force which we have, like there's a task force you may have for social studies. Does the legislature want to get in and be guiding that prior to a report being given by the task force? It's
What's a,
I don't know. I think that the oversight committee can get into the weeds too when perhaps we don't want to go there. It's just like the executive committee, executive task force, the order task force on higher education, which we just completed. Findings and recommendations were put together, but the accountability system where they have to report quarterly back to the oversight committee regarding progress being made. And the two chancellors are basically given the leadership responsibilities for ensuring that work continues and reports are provided on where they're going with the alignment of the two systems. I'm more inclined to say that I'd rather see the task force have that ability to really delve into this. They're the ones that are going to have that expertise. If we're going to have commission members, that now opens up, there would be members from the Senate or the House on there. What guarantee do we have because a commission has to have some kind of legislative participation. Am I correct on that? Yes. And do we have that expertise? That's what I'm asking.
I just thought it said in consultation with the oversight committee instead of the commissioner just appointing them all. It's kind of like an oversight for who's being appointed to make sure that there's a good cross-reference of people being appointed.
Okay, you're saying that, so we want to have consultation with the oversight committee. Well, any other thoughts on that?
I was gonna raise.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's probably why that language was in there initially to try to, depoliticize the formation or the membership of the task force. But I think there's other ways to do that too, such as going through, B through G and not making the nominees subject to being nominated by the commissioner, but having the nominees being recommended by different groups like the School Administrators Association or the School Board Association or Reaching Higher or other groups like that, and create basically an informed group that can make the recommendations for the for PBAS changes, and I think that's a way where we can leave the accountability and oversight commission for the tail end, like where you've pointed out in Roman 9, where it basically receives the report and reviews the findings and recommendations.
I guess I put it that way because I'm more familiar with this occurring differently in the state I came from, in both states, Maine and Alaska. In Alaska, the Department of Education was staffed properly. And they had a department that was comprised of people that were doing what Nate is doing right now and Caitlin, putting together assessment programs and accountability programs based upon their understandings of, test and measurement understandings of the skills that are necessary and with what is needed in the field. We don't have that here in our department. We have, are you it? Are you the department?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it. And so then we rely on a task force, which is the way we've done it. And so we put it off to a group. I just want to ensure that the group somehow has the expertise that's necessary for our department in front of us to really get this job done properly.
And I think that's exactly to the point I was trying to make, Mr. Chair, that that rather than all of those nominees coming from a singular point, that they come from a variety of different organizations that are concerned and dedicated to the quality outcomes of our students.
So Caitlin, if put your shoes on as if this is law the way it is right now. In deciding you want to have an administrator or a teacher, whether it be elementary or secondary, what would you do in order to find that person? Would you automatically pick somebody that you know, or would you also work collaboratively with some organization?
We tend to do, I would say, a combination. That's what we do right now with the current accountability task force for ESSA, where, if we have someone that leaves that task force and we need to fill a spot, sometimes we know someone who's already done a lot of work with our assessment systems. There's a number of curriculum directors in our districts. There's a few assistant superintendents and superintendents that we've worked with that are very knowledgeable about our current accountability system, oftentimes because they've had schools within their district or SAU that have been a CSI or TSI school. So as a school leader, they're already intimately familiar with what it means to work with those schools, work with those building leaders. We oftentimes work with classroom teachers in the development of our state assessment systems. And so if we have teachers that have done item writing or have sat on bias and sensitivity committees, oftentimes we'll go to those lists of teacher volunteers when we're pulling in committee members for this type of work. So we tend to have, I would say, a short list or so of people that, Caitlin and I both know around the state that have expertise, that have worked with our state assessment systems, that have worked with the accountability systems that we tend to go to. If we don't know someone off the top of the head, or we don't have someone immediately for a spot that we've worked with, oftentimes we'll reach out to the Superintendent's Association, we'll reach out to the Principals Association, and ask for them to provide us maybe with a list of 2 or 3 people that might be interested. So it's a bit of I would say it's a bit of both.
So what I'm trying to do is eliminate the possibility of the legislature putting in place something sort of like a pocket veto, where you have to get approval from the legislative oversight to have these members on this particular task force.
Well, and
I don't think that would be appropriate. Is the legislative oversight committee where you're going to feel you're going to get the type of information you're just expressed, you're seeking? Are you going to get that from that group, or are you going to get it, let's say, from NEA, or if you're going to get it from the Administrators Association or some other group?
I think those associations, to Representative Luno's point, are, they sort of know who in the field has the appropriate knowledge and background to do some of that work. We often rely on their expertise for identifying individuals. I think the checks and balances that exist in here is the fact that any recommendation has to come to the Legislative Oversight Committee from this task force. So we can't do the accountability system without their recommendations becoming law. And so there's almost 2 steps in there that I see, that it has to come to the Legislative Oversight Committee and be recommended. And then from there, it would have to come to both this group and Senate Education to actually become, future law. So there's 2 points, I think, where the legislature itself is ultimately the arbiter of what becomes the next PBAS system. The committee can't recommend a system and then move forward and implement that system without the legislature.
So, further discussion. We got to get this thing worked out.
Right.
Yeah, I think there is, my concern is that there's a difference between consultation and reporting. And so it's one thing to receive a report and then react to the report. There's another activity that takes place prior to the report that's developed by the committee. And that's why I think, back to what Representative Luno said, is to ensure that there is and Representative Cornell, that there is a balance on there. And I think that's why the consultation is important. Clearly, the Legislative Oversight Committee is not going to have the same expertise as those who work with it on a daily basis, which, Nate, you referred to. But I think that there is a concern, and I'm not sure how to resolve it, to ensure that the people who are on that have some sense of balance before they start their work. And so that, I guess that's the concern that I would have too. And I do know that in the past anyway, when we created the evaluation system, which was a lengthy process that was done several years ago, the advocate groups were clearly engaged in that at the get-go and not as just receiving a report and saying, getting feedback on it. So I think somewhere in between that would be my concern, is how do you make sure that the personnel that are there do in fact have a broad sense of constituency representation to help develop it. That's my concern.
Is it necessarily, Representative Myler, a broad understanding of constituency representation, or is it to ensure that folks have a clear understanding of performance-based accountability?
Yes.
So we want yes to both?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all I'm saying is that I think you can have both, because we can have both, because I think there are persons, and I'm not saying that an advocate group like the Superintendent's Association, for example, that they dominate the group, but that there is a voice, that they have a voice in the group, balanced by those who may be more directly involved on a day-to-day basis. That's all I'm saying. So I'm not saying that I've said what I've said.
Representative Luno.
Yeah, I think what Representative Myler talks about is right on. I think it's consistent with what Dr. Green and Ms. Davis were talking about as well. And as long as we're bringing in the involvement of multiple superintendent association, principal association, school board association, as Dr. Green has suggested happens on, in the background, not by legislative action, but in the background when it comes to making current recommendations. But actually, I've got a question to Dr. Green, if I might, because you brought up TSI and CSI, and last time we met, I think we talked about whether whether PBAS applies to charter schools. And I think the answer was no, it doesn't apply to, I think that's what the answer was. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk about that a little bit and talk about how PBAS determines TSI and CSI and what that all means.
So right now there's some confusion with the existing system because of how PBAS kind of refers back to the federal law. So right now, we have federal accountability, which is CSI, TSI, schools, all of that. That applies only to Title I schools. Yeah. Now, a charter school may be a Title I school, and in most cases is, because charter schools are eligible for Title I funds. And so any school that's receiving Title I funds would be categorized for the purpose of federal accountability. Now, then the thing that's then confusing is, so we have federal accountability. It doesn't apply to all schools, and there are a fair number of schools, specifically high schools in the state, that are not Title I schools. So they're not required to participate in the federal accountability system. On the state side of things, so state accountability should apply to all public schools, and right now it doesn't apply, all public district schools. That's who PBAS currently applies to, but it doesn't apply to charter schools. So with the two systems, we could have a CSI school that is a federal CSI school, but not categorized for this purpose of state accountability. And then we could have a state CSI school that is a CSI school for state accountability, but not for federal accountability. And that's kind of one of the main reasons that we would like to see a segregation of the two different systems, because they have very different accountability requirements. And so using the same terminology is not really helpful for the people that are involved in that system. And so we would like to get when we eventually come up with, a state accountability system as a result of this task force, hope to God we would not use the word CSI and TSI because it'd be way too confusing, and we'll have a different, schools in need of improvement, or I think there was maybe one of the last times we had maybe another some additional amendments from, it was maybe even from 1583 that was different terminology. And I think if you were doing state accountability, we really do want we really want to just kind of to separate the two. Now, as far as the charter schools, there is a requirement for accountability in the state charter school law, but the state accountability system, as in IBAS and PBAS, do not currently apply to charter schools, which means for state purposes, we are not running those calculations, but we are then running the PBAS calculation, which is tied to the federal accountability for charter schools. So it's very confusing. Is there charter schools would, when we're talking about overall accountability, and remember we have to do IBAS and PBAS, IBAS is not something that is necessarily applicable to charter schools because they're not required to comply with the minimum standards. So we'll take that outside of it. But could we potentially come up with a PBAS system that could also apply for charter schools? Because remember, it's based on performance, it's based on data. We could do that. And that is something that this task force could certainly talk about, but that would be a change into the law.
So,
Go ahead.
so would that be something that, and we're not down to it quite yet, but I think we're getting close. Down in Roman 3, and I'm looking at Representative Ladd's draft for discussion, but this is the duties of the task force, and that could be considering everything that you just talked about here, including maybe new terms coming from the state accountability.
You could add that, but if you wanted to require it for charter schools, there's a different section in RSA 193E that you would have to make it applicable to charter schools as well, because we have to go in and modify that section as well.
Okay.
But this task force could certainly study the system and see if it's something that could be applicable to charter schools. And maybe if you want them to keep in mind, specifically design a system that could work for charter schools too. It sounds like that might be something this committee could do.
So Caitlin, what would happen if we put in, something under Roman 3 saying the PBAS system will be applicable to charter schools?
So
What would happen?
So what we would do is we would run the same determinations for charter schools that we are for public schools. I think one of the challenges sometimes with charter schools is specifically size of schools. And so making sure that we would have enough data. But the other thing, and this is where the federal accountability system sometimes fails charter schools or any sort of alternative schools, is we do have a fair number of charter schools that are specifically set up to support at-risk determination or at-risk populations. And so we have a number of charter schools right now that are being categorized as CSI schools just because of the nature of their population that's applying to them or that they're helping. And so there is no carve out for that in federal law. It's something that we have specifically reached out to the U.S. Department of Education about. And so we would want to talk about that and the impacts on those schools that are for at-risk populations, but we should have that same sort of things for all public schools realistically too. So if a school district wanted to do set up a school that was specifically designated to help at-risk populations, we don't want to necessarily automatically designate them right now either. And that is the challenge with the federal system. So we would want to talk about how that would impact the charter schools that are those at-risk schools versus your traditional regular charter school that is just set up to enroll New Hampshire resident children.
So not to get too far ahead of ourselves or the task force, are charters are charters held to the same adequate education minimum standards that that public school districts are?
No, so charter schools are held to a different accountability system that exists in RSA 194B, and there's a different funding scheme set up for charter schools as well later on in the statute. So when you look at 193E3, it's specific to the adequate education funding that goes to public schools. And it's not applicable to charter schools because charter schools don't receive that stream of funding. So there is accountability, but the accountability is in a different statute, and it's not this statute.
Right, right. And is the accountability from a let's call it a PBAS standard? Would that by definition have to be different for a charter than a public school because the funding is different, the standards are different, the requirements are different, the expectations,
You would want
rules
to
and regs are different?
Yeah, so if we were to create something in here that was applicable to charter schools, we would want to also look at 194B to make sure that the two accountability systems did not end up in contradiction with themselves,
Right.
where charter schools are now being held to two competing systems.
Right.
So you'd have to evaluate both of those in light of each other. The current accountability system for charters is specific to the charter itself. It requires every charter school to identify in the charter approved by the state board their mission, vision, and goals, and the standards for which they want to be held to. So that if a charter school is, their mission is specific to supporting high school students at risk of dropout, the metrics by which they're measuring themselves are things like getting kids through various completion programs, whether it's the HiSET, alternative diploma programs, getting kids to a regular high school diploma, but maybe doing it in 5 years or 6 years as opposed to your traditional 4-year path. When we overlay things like a 4-year graduation requirement on those schools, it's a metric they'll never meet because they may have a third of their population that's coming in their 5th year. And so they can't graduate in 4 years because that ship has already sailed for those students. So for that particular school and their unique mission, you would want an accountability system that matches the mission of the school. So that's the current accountability system. It's supposed to be tied to each individual charter.
Okay. Thanks. That's a really good explanation.
I would point out too, it's not necessarily unique to charters either. We have alternative programs in public school districts that also struggle to meet current accountability systems. A really good example of that is Bud Carlson Academy in Rochester that has a very similar mission. The majority of their students work through Bud Carlson Academy in addition to working with an adult ed high school or a HiSET program. And so many of those students can't meet the current accountability system that we have set up. So Bud Carlson will always be a CSI school.
Right.
But they're doing really amazing things for the students that are coming through that school. It's just that the system is set up to measure things that those students are not going to be able to achieve because of the point that they're at in their educational careers.
So when, and if I might, so I've seen, Bud Carlson Academy on the CSI list, and this is helping explain that for me. So that is part of the Rochester School District?
It is, yeah. So many of those students, for one reason or another, were not able to be successful in the traditional curriculum within the Rochester school system. And so they attend Bud Carlson, which does a lot more support around flexible schedules. It allows students maybe who need to work during the day to then attend a HiSET program in the afternoon or at night. I want to say they have maybe somewhere between 48 and 50 students, so it's not a large program. But when we look at things like state assessment requirements, most of the students are seniors or they're 5th year seniors or they're 6th year seniors. So many of them aren't required to take the SAT because that's required in 11th grade. So there's not a lot of assessment evidence that we can use. I think we only generally have maybe 3 or 4 students that take the SAT out of about the 40 or 50 students that attend. So it's difficult to get achievement data to then use as part of the accountability system. So for alternative programs like that, our current accountability system just isn't set up to measure them effectively.
Right. So just based on what I just learned on this then, just from this conversation here, with Bud Carlson Academy, perennially on the CSI list, that does not mean Bud Carlson Academy is failing. Failing in its mission or failing its students or failing in general. And it doesn't mean that the Rochester School District is failing in its mission or failing in general either.
Right. I would argue that they're actually doing really amazing things for those students because by having the academy in the first place, they're keeping students in some type of program as opposed to those students just ending up on the dropout list.
Right.
And there are a number of other districts that have programs
We have
similar
a
to
similar
that.
program up in Woodsville.
Yep. Newport has a program. Nashua has a program.
So this is an example where the message doesn't correspond with really what's happening.
Right.
with the
Correct,
reality.
yeah.
And that's partly why we need to look at the accountability system as a whole, because we need to say, like, what are these different types that we can really design a system to help and support those systems.
Is this, it's an important topic we're just talking about here. Is that something that you believe, given the nature of what the task force has to do, we would be expanding it to see the applicability of PBAS to certain charter schools? Certainly King Street School, I think would have a difficult time with some of this. It's a small school like we've been just talking about within SAU 23.
I think two pros, so King Street and French Pond.
And French
for
Pond's the
younger
other one,
grades.
yeah.
Exactly. It's an alternative program sort of outside your traditional curriculum that's still serving those students.
Yeah. Are their scores meshed in with SAU, with the co-op, or?
They will be now going forward. Initially, they had been separate alternative schools.
Yeah.
They've recently now kind of brought those schools back in under the Woodsville High School and the middle school there.
Yeah.
So the results going forward will be reported as part of the overall Woodsville scores. Previously, they've been classified sort of oddly in our database, and so their scores weren't actually being reported anywhere. They weren't part of Woodsville, and they were popping up sort of oddly as private schools.
Well, certainly their goals, their objectives are more aligned IEP type orientation than they are on that. And I don't know if putting under that big umbrella of the high school in Woodsville is the appropriate thing to
And
do.
these are the sort of things that we would really like to
Yeah.
have conversations with the task force. This is
Well, maybe it's
why we need
something
to
we
look
can
at
add
this.
on as a duty to the task force.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made a note too on the bottom of the page here. Let's go back up to the top here, though, where we were dealing with consultation. Consultation with what? The legislative oversight and the governor? What's the governor going to do in terms of helping to provide membership? And what really is the legislative? It's consultation with some of the professional organizations we have within our state. And so maybe we need to word it as such.
Yeah, and more than consultation, this is consultation sort of doesn't mean very much like, yeah, we talked about it, but I would suggest that these organizations actually nominate
Then you're gonna have to figure out which organization's gonna do the nominating. It's gonna be AFT, NEA,
well,
Reaching Higher,
Well, for example, there's two down in F. There's two
yeah.
teachers,
yeah,
one by NEA, one by AFT. There's I think 5 or 6. Where is it? In B, there's 6 administrators. They can all be nominated by the SAA. There's 1 school board member by School Board Association.
Principals.
Yep, there's principals by Principals Association.
yeah, Representative Dry. Hi. Go ahead.
Before we go a little bit further, I just want to ask, in D, in the original bill, it's kind of a catch-all, educational experts, parents, members of a public interest group, interested in education. And that doesn't make the jump to the amendment, like there's no parents, no public groups or anything. Is that intentional?
Well, in the amendment, it says, gee, other educational experts whose understanding of performance-based accountability and expertise would be, a benefit to that task force. That could be a parent. But you see, what you want to do is, are you going to put a person on a group like that just because they're a parent? Or are you going to also be looking to see what this person can bring? It's going to be between 9 and 15 people, and they're all going to have some understanding of it. How do we measure performance-based?
Okay, so follow up.
Yeah.
Just the way you were describing somebody nominating it, how would a parent get nominated at that point?
Well, my first question is, why the parent?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying this is what's already in the bill, and I just wondered if we're bringing that forward at all.
Well,
Could you assume that at least one of these people that are from the other organizations is a parent?
I would assume somewhere along the way, there's going to be a parent in there.
I mean,
Yeah, okay,
I have
that's true.
5 kids in the public school system, so I certainly don't mind also representing a
Right.
parent.
But I did have a long discussion with, I can't remember, it was Nate or Caitlin on this, or not long, but a discussion saying, what are some of the skill sets that we want these individuals to have? So we come out of here with something that's meaningful and relevant. And yes, performance is always not measured by a test, although we do say something objective elsewhere in statute. But there's other ways of doing that. I think we can get that from the classroom teachers. We can get that from everybody else here. But it's the skill set that they bring forward.
Yeah,
that's
and
most important.
I was gonna comment on that, because I think even though you're talking about the advocate groups making these recommendations, it seems to me that there ought to be some standard with which that individual comes from. So it's not just any classroom teacher, but would be a classroom teacher that's actually done the assessments, been involved in it, maybe even done some graduate work in it. So that it would seem to me that there could be some qualifying language for the recommendations that would come forward.
See, that's why, if I don't mean to hog the conversation here, that like an F, we're talking about the teachers that are familiar with
Right,
performance-based.
exactly,
Other
Exactly.
educators in G that, it says the same thing, whose understanding of performance-based. So that would go into, I would say that, whether something's reliable or valid or et cetera in the test and measurement domain as well.
I think it's important to remember these are very heavy data-driven conversations and meetings, and a very unique person would be it already takes a very unique person to be interested in doing this work to begin with because of the type of work it is. And so it is important that we have somebody with the right skill set. I'm wondering if maybe instead of assigning a parent to this area, or even talking about some of the other constituents, maybe if we have a place where the task force would hold like a listening session or a couple type things like that to really gauge that community input, because this is such an important measurement. But then the day-to-day parts of this conversation really are in the hands of the experts that are used to dealing with the education data. And I mean, to have somebody else's point, I'm not sure, maybe Representative Myler, even not every single superintendent in this state is going to be appropriate for this role, because different superintendents have very different skill sets, or different teachers or whatnot. And that's something that we're really going to want to measure before we put people on this task force. And that's going to be very important to the department. Like we're going to need to come up with some sort of process to make sure that people have the skills and the time to commit to this and understand, because this is it's a lot of work the department's going to be expecting from these individuals.
If your task force is doing their job, the committee we were on, Dave, Representative Luno, that the task for the executive order, we took time to listen to students. We took time to gather from the
Commissioner.
professors.
We did a
We
big peek.
took time to do that with numerous folks that had been in the business
Yep.
of
All the
chancelloring
higher
and all
ed
that.
task
And with that, we got good input.
Yeah.
That's important. So the hearing process should involve gathering information, as you say, Caitlin, through the,
So maybe should we write that into this?
well,
or
I just
should-
made a note to add in underneath Roman 3, some reference to the hearing process to gather information from the field and all those that are involved.
And I remember we did do that when we developed the ESSA plan. We did statewide listening tours with that. We went to a fair number of schools across the state at night, so parents could come in and provide input. And
Maybe we drag some of that language for that and put it in here.
yeah,
Yeah, Representative Chair Ladd, I think that's a really good observation here, because I think that task force ran pretty well. And I think it particularly ran well with the department, serving as, as sort of chief of staff and support for that task force, with Director Appleby as its chair, and Dr.
What's Nick's last? Marks.
Nick Marks.
And
yeah.
he was exceptional.
Yeah. And so two individuals that I think are conspicuously absent from this list are both of you. And maybe that's something that we want to consider is a task force that is really.
I would gather, I would hope that the commissioner or designee, and we're looking at the designee right in front of us, one of you, probably Nate.
So to some extent, that we expect this task force to be oversight to the department, and so it's challenging when the department is actually a voting member, and that's partially why we wrote in the department personnel shall advise, facilitate, and provide technical support. But we're really looking for the experts, of the external people that are working with the kids and implementing the assessments and collecting the data and doing all that to really advise how it's going to work in the field. And so, if the task force comes up with some sort of recommendation that then the departments go, well, we can't implement that because we don't have a way of collecting that data, or, X, Y, and Z, we would be part of that conversation. We would be obviously at every single meeting, but we're really looking for the experts to advise us on this.
Representative Penderno.
I have a little bit of a different question. It has to do with how the task force is comprised. So it's on line 10, it says no fewer than 9 and no more than 15 members. And when you count up lines A through C, right there, that's 9 already. And then by the time you get down to line F, you're at 13. So where's the wiggle room in the allotment of the makeup of the
Yeah,
committee?
that would come under the other experts under G. And the reason for that is that I included in here an elementary teacher and a secondary teacher, so that we can get from the field what has been going on and what's our perceptions and insights in terms of performance-based accountability. So it narrows it down. There's more identified, and so you don't have 2 left over. I saw that also, but it's going to be difficult trying to find real good people to be on this task force.
Well, it seems like the minimum is really 13, like no fewer than 13 and no more than 15, because by the time you get down to line G, you only have 2 positions left.
Governor's task force.
Close to that number. I don't have it in front of me today, but I know that, for example, when we're setting up some of our boards, we have up to, it's always an odd number. It goes up to 9 to 15, I believe, for co-ops. So it's a common number we use, 15 for a number of things.
I'm not questioning the number, I'm just questioning the minimum.
Yeah.
I think that's a good observation. At least it should be consistent with the listed required numbers.
And another thing to remember is, like, there's a lot of superintendents that also hold a principal certificate, that also hold teaching certificates. So, I mean, some people could count as more than once too. So we've got to, there is some wiggle room within that, but.
Further discussion. We got to go back up now. Let's get this thing on Roman 2. Did we resolve the consultation issue or not? I heard we had not got there yet.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of using language nominated by, and having the groups. And you know what, I know there's an infinite number of groups, but just looking at the groups that regularly come to 207 and attend hearings, whether it's school board association or school administrators association. Reaching higher, we've got the New Hampshire special educators. Is it special education administrators? SAA. So Jane Bergeron, and then when it comes to G, we also have a lot of very interested people that may have different views on things, from Bonnie Dunham.
Well, you also people that are doing the teaching of this at PSU and Keene.
Right. Right.
They're very good in this area of, they have classes on it.
Yeah. So I think having, you know, people that have spent a lot of time in this committee showed a vested interest in the work the state does on educational standards and student outcomes. Having them make nominations, the commissioner shall appoint based on those nominations, and so I think much of the language could stay, but that each of the ones A through F or A through G have nominated by, New Hampshire, I'm just looking at D, New Hampshire, nominated by New Hampshire School Board Association.
I actually disagree with that because I think it would be in the purview of the commissioner to reach out to those organizations to ask for nominations. I'm not necessarily certain that that would have to be in statute. And I certainly would disagree with listing specific organizations in statute.
Well, it was in statute on the task force, not by organizations, but by different, on the governor's task force, based on different roles and given the sort of the nature of today's politics, I think having language that more mirrors how the governor's task force was established would result not only in, I think, more work that is representative of the broad interests of Granite Staters, but also something that is going to provide a good work product that when it comes to the oversight assessment and oversight committee down in the bottom of page 2 is going to be something that has recommendations that can be turned into statute, which I think is the whole objective of this.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a term for serving on this? I mean, are we asking them to commit the rest of their lives to PBAS?
Is there a term for the length of the person that's on this task force? How long do you see this task force, Caitlin or Nate, continuing? It may continue because there is a process which we have laid out.
There should always be an oversight task force for the accountability for an adequate education.
Yeah.
It will be something that will be extremely helpful for the department as we,
Well, we have
want
that.
to make changes and recommendations. As far as terms, we don't have terms on our existing task force. It's typically a superintendent retires, and so we need or moves to a role where they, feel like they can't commit the amount of time needed to it. Because we like the consistency a lot of times. It's really helpful to have, the people that have been on the Federal Accountability Task Force for 5-6 years now are probably some of the most helpful because they remember why certain things were written into the plan and whatnot. But I mean, having terms could be beneficial too. We would want them staggered, so we're not looking for new task force all at once and things like that. That might be something that could be figured out over time, and there will be probably natural attrition over time that we wouldn't necessarily need to write into law.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm asking this question is if we're looking to organizations, we're kind of assigning a letter to different organizations, and I just wonder if we want to commit ourselves to that.
I still think we need some latitude on this, that we want to have the very best people on here we can get, regardless of where they come from. We're talking about our accountability system for education. And it's important that these people coming on have that great skill set. It's not like the Public School Infrastructure Commission, where we have identified you will have Homeland Security Director. So the director leaves, a new director, but the next director is on it automatically. The members from the Senate and the House are appointed each year, each biennium, by the president or the speaker. we have a rotation, but it's not built into law.
But Mr. Chair, on, you know, like you said, you're just talking about the oversight, committee, right? The members appointed by the president.
I was talking about the Public School Infrastructure Commission.
Okay.
The oversight's very similar.
Very, very similar
Yeah.
to that. But those appointments are also based on, the, you know, the composition of the two chambers,
That's
the
right.
House and the House and the Senate. And the way this is currently drafted here, all of the appointments of something that affects 165,000 students, you know, more if you include charters, you know, statewide, all of the nominations, all of the appointments would come from a single source. And I think given the broad impact that this has, that having you know, having multiple organizations involved in making those nominations, the commissioner could certainly select from those. I'm not, you know, I think the structure of this, you know, provides for that, is real important. And we've seen certainly multiple, you know, a number of organizations represented here over the 120-ish bills we've had, even this year alone, that have shown a vested interest in student outcomes, and may have different approaches to it. Now, that's fine, but I think having a task force that is composed of people who are vested and skilled, that can arrive at you know, findings and recommendations that, you know, with Dr. Green and Ms. Davis's support, I think is really important here.
Okay, if you go down to line 13, where 6 or more individuals will hold a current New Hampshire certification, superintendent, assistant superintendent, or curriculum administrator. So which organizations would the commissioner contact? The State School Administrators Association, Elementary Principals Association, Secondary
For B,
but would the department have a better handle on which superintendents really have been involved with curriculum development and test and measurement? Whereas there's some superintendents might be good CEOs from the perspective of finances, but not on the other side of the coin. They rely upon staff interworking within that administrative group, maybe like a Manchester, which has the support staff around.
so
Sure.
yeah, I think nobody would have a better sense of that when it comes to school district leadership than you know, Dr. McLean and Dr. Furr.
Maybe.
I mean,
You know,
they're-
because that changes too. That does change. You know, if you could go back to the leadership we once had there, would they
Dr.
have
Joyce.
a hand?
Yeah,
Well, Dr. Joyce, yes, I have a lot of faith in Mark, but there, I don't know. Nate, do you have anything to say on that?
I think regardless of whether it's written into statute or not, the work that we do with accountability and assessment can't be done without the support and assistance of the organizations. We regularly reach out to them. On our current 3-year cycles, we identify about 90 schools around the state. I'm the one that calls each of those school principals to talk them through their data, to let them know what the determination was, to let them know what it's going to look like for the next, you know, year to 2 years to 3 years for their school. So, you know, I think there's a lot of different ways we could write this in here. Regardless, we're going to be working with those associations, I think, whether it's in statute or not, because just to do the work itself, we're working with all the superintendents in the state. We're working directly with the building principals. We have a lot of sort of active stakeholder groups that we reach out to when we're considering changing internal policies, or we're looking at you know, taking different parts of our state assessments in different directions in order to keep up with current instructional trends and, you know, what's happening as we move towards things like, you know, computer science and AI and, you know, all the different things that are, you know, starting to appear in classrooms that are, you know, new for teachers and new for students. So I think it's already an integral part of the system we have in place now. And I think to Caitlin's point too, there are a lot of superintendents in the state. Many of them have different backgrounds. Many of them have different interests that they're interested in, whether it's curriculum and instruction, whether it's assessment, whether it's fiscal policy within their community. And we tend to work really closely with the group of superintendents and principals who have a really strong understanding of assessment and accountability. So I would just throw it out there that I think we're currently doing that. I think we work a lot with those associations now, even in the work that we're doing.
Thanks very much. I'm satisfied with.
Well,
with that. I
so,
think that's
so
very
you,
good
Nate,
response.
in working with these folks out in the field, you could probably come up with a list of those people which have the expertise in this area that really show it when you're talking with them on the horn or whatever. They are probably able to go down into the weeds and ask the type of questions which need to be asked, rather than somebody say, yes, I'll do it. Just send me the form.
I mean, and this is something we very frequently do. Like we have a question in the office. We're like, all right, which superintendent should we consult? And we have our go-to that we know about that will like be able to answer that on the spot or whatnot. One thing we also just need to make sure that we're careful of too is just time and consideration, how much people can dedicate to this. Just because a superintendent has the knowledge doesn't mean they have the time or capacity given whatever challenges they're currently experiencing in a school district. Like a principal that's from a school that's building a school might not be able to participate in this task force right now, even though they have a great expertise. They need to put their resources on that. So it's things like that that we're constantly considering, that we're constantly working with, that we are in consultation with NHSAA very regularly, and the School Boards Association, and working through those committees those groups make it easier for us to do our jobs.
So we'll rewrite Roman 2 there on line 10 to try to integrate some of our discussion which we've had here. Could you help us do that, Nate or Caitlin, or do you want us to sit down as legislators to write in consultation or with nomination from or whatever?
Yeah, I think you could do it in relatively general language that kind of gets to the heart of what we're talking about here. That's, in consultation with stakeholder groups and associations in the state that are involved with assessment and accountability work,
That's good to me.
without identifying, the specific groups.
Yeah.
How much of a time commitment do you think this involves?
Or what was that?
Well, how much time do you think it will involve? Just generally, how much time are they committing?
I would say it probably,
Fair amount.
yeah, a fair amount. I heard you just say once a month. I would say actually probably more frequently than once a month. I could see like doing two-day meetings, especially in the beginning when we're really trying to get the work and the organization and whatnot planned. It makes sense to do it more frequently too, back-to-back days, just so people are not forgetting each month. But I would say, yeah, in the first year, probably at least 2 days a month.
This is a huge job. We had a person up in the district I was in, that was his sole job, PhD, and also was teaching at the University of Alaska Anchorage on this topic, and was extremely knowledgeable and spent full time doing this. And we're asking now it be done through a task force here. So it's going to be, this is why when Steve Appleby chaired that committee with his assistant there, we always had, the minutes went out, the records were kept squared away, we had support, we'd request information, they made the contacts to get the people in from the field. It wasn't all on the chair. And that's, on every, even like CTE, Jeff Beard does our work. Yes, yeah,
The School Funding Commission too.
yes.
Bruce and Kevin.
So with that said, what is the meaning of 2A?
2A, the commissioner designate who shall select.
No, I'm talking down, excuse me, down at line 27.
927.
Person shall advise, facilitate. Is that what we're talking about?
Right. So we're going to be a part of the task force, but we're not saying that we're voting members. We need to be there. We need to attend all of the meetings. We're going to facilitate
you-
the meetings. We're going to
you-
call
you
the meetings.
Do the meeting, minutes, call the meeting,
Correct.
get the resources there.
Correct.
That's how you envision that?
Yes.
2A, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think too, when we're talking about pulling in outside groups, there's, New Hampshire's actually really lucky in that there are a lot of national assessment experts and organizations that call New Hampshire home. Several large national assessment companies, Center for Assessment, which has done a lot of work with the department, that's essentially built accountability systems for the state of Utah, for Wyoming. They're currently working directly with Hawaii. So we have a lot of really good expertise here that while necessarily wouldn't be, a specific member on the task force, the department would be able to pull them in based off of what's going on in the current discussions, when are the meetings, this group over here has this expertise, we've got measured progress, now Cockney up in the Seacoast area. So I also see that as part of what the department will be able to do because we have those connections with various assessment and accountability experts in the state that can come in as needed and advise the task force.
Now, are we good with that, line 12? The commissioner or designee, that individual will be a member. The way I read this, because it says, shall consist of the commissioner or designee who shall select the chairman, or is the chairman going to be elected by at the first meeting, which oftentimes turns back to be somebody that's, in charge and has the resources to act as a chair.
Yeah, I think that's challenging for the department where we really expect it to be oversight and then we're putting the department on it. I think obviously 2 meetings ago we had robust conversations of how does the chairperson get elected, and I would imagine that is your response to doing that. But I don't know that you want the department to be on the actual committee so much as just having the kind of the oversight of the task force.
Representative Cascade.
Just add to the discussion, I had in my notes also that we talked about the task force shall be elected once it is put together. I didn't perceive the Department of Ed would be part of that 9 to 15 member group. Let me see, that the task force, once it was put together, would elect a chair, and it wouldn't be somebody from the Department of Ed because of what their role is. Didn't know if it would add value to add current employee or public school experience anywhere, or even public in the school board member, because it's very technical work. And then the last thing, I had a lot of what you had in your amendment. I don't know, I've never worked with a curriculum director in my district, and a lot of districts don't have that position. Does that matter here, as long as there's one on the committee that represents the state? Is that what the thought is there?
So I think the curriculum instructors that we work with are excellent throughout the state, but you're right, not every district has them, and in many districts, a superintendent or assistant superintendent really serves that role.
Right.
And so that's kind of why in that line 6 we had the superintendent, assistant superintendent, or sorry, line 13.
Yep.
Be so superintendent, assistant superintendent, or curriculum
Right, okay.
administrator. Now the confusing thing is though also now we have it down on line 18
It's broken
too.
out,
So that's almost like 2 of those folks, but
potentially.
they are a very important individual. The school districts that have them, that's the people that are doing the majority of this work in in those school districts. So that's why we wanted to be able to include them.
Okay.
So are you saying, Caitlin, you would take out line 12, the commissioner or designee who shall select the chairman of the task force to keep that
I think that should actually be down on line 27 if we're wanting the commissioner to select the chairman, because I think that was in response to we had these conversations about how do we get a chairman. So I think that really actually belongs down in 2A. So a department shall advise, blah blah blah, and then it say the commissioner shall select the chairman if that's how you want it to be, or as Representative Cascadon just said, or have the committee, the task force elect
The
it.
task force could elect
But
one.
that was definitely a big question that came up last time. We were-
Somebody's going to have to call the first meeting.
Right,
The commissioner
Right.
could do that.
and I would think the commissioner would do
can
that.
call the first meeting And then at that first meeting, then you go through your electing
Your
chair.
Yeah.
duties
That can
and
be
what,
put in there.
Okay.
That's very typical.
yeah,
Okay.
yep. That would make sense. Okay,
The commissioner or designate
Yeah,
calls the first meeting.
yep.
and chair elected.
It's usually when it's, and if he's not gonna be a member of it, the commissioner does the calling. He said, remember the civics book, textbook stuff? That was called by the commissioner.
Mhm.
And then we elected
Right, a chair.
LaMontagne. Yeah.
Right, right.
And,
Well,
and
and-
that's with most of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the case of the higher ed task force, it was the commissioner's designee who called the meeting and chaired the
And
task
voted,
force.
and voted.
And voted.
Yeah.
Well, you know, but also an important thing I think for this task force too, is that it was for the higher ed task force. We worked to consensus.
Yeah,
I mean, isn't that how this is a work to consensus task?
it sure is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, okay, so the commissioner will not be a member, or designee will not be a member, will, call the meeting
get it
and,
going.
and then they will, and start the meeting, first meeting out.
Yep.
And then elect a chair there, and then
Then
Commissioner
let it
Baxaw,
go.
and then the technical support comes in to assist.
Okay,
Well, it'd give you, instead of 2, it'd give you 3. Modern math is correct here. Okay. Which gives, that's good, because maybe you can get more experts involved. I don't know.
you might, yeah, we might get a teacher.
Yeah.
I don't know, extra
Okay,
teacher.
so that takes us down, so we'll take the commission, drop it down in the line 27 where it's 2A, and write all that language in there.
Yep.
And then we'll have Nate help us write some language up top on line 10, or at 10, 11 there.
Yep.
So that's good. And then on item 3 there, Roman 3, the task force shall have the following duties. We wanted something in there like investigate and make recommendations regarding the applicability of the PBAS program,
PBAS.
program, applicability to charter schools.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
Applicability and leave it
Yeah,
really.
yeah, leave it there so they can deal with that, which they probably should touch on.
And also, I don't,
Alternatives.
yeah, alternative schools.
That's a regular ongoing discussion that we have currently within my office with my staff is, the alternative programs, charter schools. So I think that
Okay.
conversation could very easily feed into
Slide right in.
to this task force as well.
Good,
Yeah.
okay. So we can put that in there.
so would it be public charters and public alternatives, or does it matter? Is that what you're thinking?
I
Is it
think
two separate?
they're very, very similar. I think you would
Yeah.
want to look at both because if
okay.
you'd want to have some kind of carve out that allows for
Yeah.
flexibility for
They are
schools
different.
that have alternative models, which includes public alternative schools and charter schools.
Yep,
Is alternative schools the appropriate term?
That's the term in statute. Yep.
that's, yeah, I think people understand that.
And then also, I think, include in Roman 3, public comment and, do we have?
Opportunities for public comment
Yeah,
set up by the task force
Yeah, we
or
can come
something
up
like
with
that.
language for that, but public comment and do we have consulting with? Is it anywhere in here? Consulting with other, experts and stakeholders. Like what we talked about with the governor's task force and
Yeah.
higher, where we.
Does it need to be
Does it have
in
to be in here?
statute or
Wouldn't that
would
be
the
a
task
given
force
that
just
you
say,
would just
well, let's
get us
reach
more-
out to so-and-so, we
No, I'm
know.
not saying reaching out to specific people, but that, because I think we have had this in commissions and other task forces before, that you,
We did, and you're talking
you-
higher ed, we did reach out to some of to NETCHI and some of the other organizations, and we found out that there've been 3 attempts for a merger throughout the country, and all 3 have failed. And
Right.
that was one of the reports which we saw.
right, Right.
I think what Representative Luno is saying is that just that experts will be made available to the task force.
Just a
That's-
general statement, a general
task force
statement.
would reach out
Right, yeah,
to
exactly.
consult with,
Right, yeah.
with others. You don't even need to call experts, but consult with others, you
Outside,
know, yeah.
outside entities or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, Education Commission, the stage, all these other things, yeah, yeah.
You probably don't.
Do you need it?
Well,
It's likely something we would do anyway, so I don't
Yeah.
Right.
think it needs to be
Right.
written in.
The task force,
Um,
somebody on the
Because
task force will say, hey, I know.
they're gonna do this research, and research
Right.
means chase it
Going
down.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a National Association of Alternative Schools that focuses a lot of their effort on this. There is not a chapter in New Hampshire. There are a couple of alternative schools in New Hampshire that have looked to see what it would take to create a chapter of that association here in the state. So that could be a national expert group that we could reach out to. We have some local charter school groups. The New Hampshire Charter School Alliance is one that we could reach out to that sort of represents charter schools within New Hampshire. So there are groups that we would likely reach out to.
Okay, let's move down, so we can add something in there where the research, it's kind of a given, there's going to be doing that, but, Roman 4, department may provide stipends, mileage, and expenses. This is an addition that's come in, from the department, along with Roman 5, any unexpended funds for the biennium ending that year.
That's not what it is.
That was the date.
That's just an account that we may anticipate having some additional funds
But
left over.
is the
So
date-
we're trying to do it with no additional cost. So, because we were just saying those funds would carry forward. So we had obviously a lot of conversations last time about paying mileage and stipends and reimbursements and things like that. If the department were to consult with one of those educational experts, we assume there should be some costs. So the department was, and so trying to not have any sort of associated cost with this, I was trying to find funding that may be left over in this biennium, that we might have some excess funds. Maybe it might be $20,000 to $30,000 right now. It really depends on like what we have. So just trying to find just various lines of funding that would be appropriate to use for this. So
It doesn't need to be written in statute. 10, 11, 12 might be in practice.
Would it help for fiscal?
it does because otherwise those funds will lapse. So
Yeah.
without that there, those funds will automatic lapse in 2 months here. And so,
Be able to do
right,
Yes.
Right.
right.
And what is that account number again?
It's our state assessment account right now.
So it's currently the funds support the different assessment contracts right now.
So that date, June 30, 2025 is good?
So that's, I mean, we would need 25 because that's our current budget right now. That's the line we're trying to tell not lapse.
And it shall not lapse.
Right. But depending on when this task force actually wraps up, because I think we really do need to look at the time that we've designated here. We may want to add that till 26, but we would need it anyways for now to make sure this existing biennium doesn't lapse.
So should any unexpended funds for the biennium in account and leave out the date?
No, we need the date.
You need
We
the
need the
date.
date.
Okay. Okay,
For it to not.
Exactly.
okay,
Yep.
Turn back into a pumpkin.
okay. Jumping down,
Yes, we could.
we did look at Roman 6. What about A, B, C, and D? It is in establishing the performance base, the task force may consider one or more of the following data indicators. And remember that litany of indicators which we've seen before? We've taken them all out and just referenced that section of law.
Well, we also took out, using on line 13, I'm looking at the draft,
Yeah,
using only the best available accountability system.
Yeah, that was a typo that should have never been there to begin with. So that it's good to get that out. Yes. Representative Belcher, yeah. Representative Belcher had a lot of questions about that, and it should not have been there. It was confusing everybody, including us. So
Questions,
Indicators.
when does the commissioner get familiar with this work? Or at what point is the commissioner responsible for carrying this forward? Well, on part, see, 5 and 6, at some point, we We have a lot of responsibility here on the task force.
So what the task force would ultimately do is essentially determine, a report that says these are the recommendations. In order to do anything to move forward with those recommendations, the department would need legislation. And so the oversight committee that we would present this to would hopefully take that up into the legislation. And that legislation then would require the Department of Education to implement the result of that legislation. So that's when the department would start doing that work, as soon as we have legislation essentially requiring.
Are there any other changes issues we might want to discuss here on this?
Yeah, on Roman 6.
Yeah,
So we're taking out, right, using only the best available accountability system.
yeah, I've got that.
Leaving in, which shall be based on data and indicators, taking out, which are already provided to the department and or performance measures that schools are already required. And then leaving in, provided to the department, we'll edit there, under state and federal laws or other available data as deemed, relevant, something like that, because you may want to consider, or the task force may want to consider
Other,
a PBAC that considers some data that's now available, but currently not being collected under state and federal law.
I think, and I think we talked about writing that, maybe I'm gonna pull up but I think we do want to give, I think we want the task force to be obviously very conscious of what the department already collects, what schools are responsible for providing to the department, because we don't want to add a bunch of indicators that we either can't collect or that is going to take a ton of time, and what value is that going to be. But I think we do want to give the task force the flexibility of using an additional data set that we are maybe not thinking, and there were a fair number of them thrown out last time in this room of X, Y, and Z. So I can draft that to be to add that flexibility.
That would be really.
But I mean, I think so. Right now, the department collects data because it is required to report that data in the federal accountability system, and so there's no reason why a similar type. So the state accountability system requires us to. So we're going to collect the data required for that.
And I think too that, if the task force is looking at additional data to be collecting, one of the responsibilities would be to look at the feasibility. If it's not currently collected, like, would there be a cost associated with that? Would it be borne by the state, or would it be borne by local school districts? And what would that look like?
So Caitlin, you're going to write some language for Roman 6 here.
I can do that. Yes.
Okay. And adding in or other relative data, et cetera. Yeah. Okay, see, other metrics as determined by the task force, that gives them kind of a wide open. Yeah.
So you could probably even eliminate and establish from establishing all the way through A, B, and C. We could leave it in two. May consider one.
I mean, I think we want the task force to look at what people
think they ought to look
existingly
at,
do.
yeah.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think having performance data, right? It's a performance-based accountability system. We want to look at performance on the state assessment. I think it makes sense that that's listed as number one. So,
Okay, so we're now down to Roman 7. So we're providing this information to the State Board of Education and the Legislative Oversight Committee. Are you expecting any kind of action from the Legislative Oversight Committee?
well, yes, ultimately, we would need legislation to enact the new accountability system as a result
Okay,
of
so-
this task force.
See, it doesn't say that right now. It says the task force shall provide a report of findings and recommendations. So those recommendations and findings come forward for future legislation. And that's so, and it says to the State Board of Education, is it for future approval, or is it, or is it you're looking for, yeah, we want to go forward with this through legislation?
Would that come from the legislature
Does it need more clarification?
Yeah.
recommendation?
Oh, so yeah, I guess I don't. Can we? We need to tell somebody to write a bill.
Yeah,
I don't know, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know if OLS has it, but that's exactly what happens, and I don't know. Can we force anybody to write a bill on something?
Well, can you just add the word make recommendations for future legislation, does that clarify? what you're-
And would that come from the oversight committee then? So if we're presenting a report to that legislative oversight committee, would the oversight committee then take the step to then create and move forward a bill that would actually enact the PBS?
well, see, the
Legislation.
Legislative Oversight Committee is appointed by the Speaker and the President. And see, what year are we talking here? Will there even be a Legislative Oversight Committee working at that time? You know, yeah, well, see, the biennium ends, the year in right now, it ends,
So I think two things.
Soon.
I think the September 2025 is probably too ambitious when we put that date.
Yeah.
We're going to have to push that out, unfortunately. The department would like this work done sooner rather than later. And when we started drafting this last summer, September 2025 seemed really far away, but now it does not seem that far. So
I wouldn't push it out any further than November, which would be the date most study committee reports
I
are
think
due for
I think it's
future
going to
legislation.
be really challenging. I think we need to push out a whole nother year. Because I think when we're talking about I think the unfortunate that when we're talking about the nomination process and just even in this room of who the appropriate members are, I think it's going to take quite a bit of time to get the initial task force organized. By the time this legislation passes, so assuming that you all get it done and get it through committee of conference, it gets signed on the governor's desk, it goes 60 days, it goes in place in September. We can't ask schools to start thinking about who should be on this task force September and October. No superintendent's going to sign up to do anything on September or October, nor are Nate and I, because we're going to be, so then we're talking about late fall. And so September is too ambitious. I
Right,
think,
right.
so.
So if you have November 2025, that would give the task force a year.
I still think, I think we probably need to push it out for another full
what
year.
about June
Okay.
30, 2025?
That's
26.
26.
Excuse, 26.
I think that's probably
26.
I think that's
That's what I
more
meant, at the end of
realistic.
that school year.
Doable.
Yeah, I think that's more doable.
Because you're not going to get a whole lot of work done by anybody during July, August, September.
Right. No, I think June 26 is I think probably is more appropriate.
June 30, 2026.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
We still didn't though resolve the so will the oversight committee, I mean, so we bring this report, will the oversight, I mean, obviously, so there's some of you here that are on the oversight committee. What if nobody on the oversight committee wants to move forward legislation? Like, what do we do about that? That's a question that I have.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, anybody can file legislation.
Yeah.
Somebody could file legislation to have a PBAS that does something completely
Right,
different
of
than what the
course,
task
right,
force
of
recommends.
course.
So I think I think this is where good intentions comes in.
Okay.
That I think you would find good intentions among a bipartisan group on the oversight committee to file legislation.
Okay.
So
But that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And we're
But I would
think we're
also
hopeful
think,
that-
as we talked about it on line 24, it says report findings and make recommendations. I think that putting the word make in there, I think makes it a little stronger as it relates to the action of the task force.
okay.
Yeah,
I think that's
that,
good,
that,
yeah.
that works to me. Make recommendations and the legislative oversight committee is going to have yay or nay. Yeah, yeah. And if you pick, a elected official, pick a representative. So it doesn't come to us at the last moment from the other side of the wall. Exactly the same